And welcome, my dear readers, back to Monster Mash by FredMSlonkier. For our final tale tonight from this collection of stories, we must remind ourselves that curiosity killed the cat. In the case of Twilight Sparkle, this little kitty is about to die several times over. In the case of the wild Clover the Water, Twilight Sparkle would never know what forces led her to obtain the book. She and her friends had traveled to Canterlot on official business. Some bureaucrat had proposed a holiday, recognizing the elements of harmony, and Princess Celestia invited them to speak their minds on how they felt about recognition. But the wheels of the government could turn strangely slowly for what was typically a hot diarchy, and they found themselves with an excess of time to kill. Under normal circumstances, Twilight would have happily spent the entirety of her free time either immersed in the text of the Royal Library or socializing with her friends. But both had been denied to her this afternoon. The library was closed. An infestation of bookworms had been discovered, and they were fumigating. And her friends had each left on their own jaunts through the city, without thinking to tell her where they were going. Which means somebody's going to find out about the Tears of Gaia. So she wandered the streets of Canterlot, hoping she might spot a familiar face, either one of her new friends or one of her old. She hesitated to even call them acquaintances, like Moon Dancer, Minuet, Lemon Hearts, and Twinkleshine. Certainly she knew them, but the old bookish Twilight Sparkle had found friendship a distraction from the pursuit of knowledge, and she had spent as little time around those circumstances present to her company as possible. She wasn't even certain what she would do or say if she did meet one of them. Perhaps it was apology. It was too late, she felt, to reach out in friendship. Trips in Canterlot were too rare of occurrence. Give it time, Twilight. Get a pair of wings, and you'll meet them. Sorry, this whole entire paragraph is filled with so much delicious, juicy irony. It's not even funny. I love reading a fanfic that was made back in 2012. The estate sale caught her eye as he wandered to the crowd surrounding the table set up in front of Canterlot's older houses. A once fine manor had slumped with neglect and decay. Moon Dancer's house. An auctioneer was selling off the former possessions of the former owner by one to the passers-by. It struck Twilight as a dismal proceeding. The owner must have died without heir or family. His property, falling into care of the state, was now sought to convert it into whatever sum of bits it could attain. The history of his line would be lost, cut into dozens of conversation pieces scattered about Canterlot. She didn't intend to linger, the whole affair reinforcing a melancholy mood, but at that moment the auctioneer had called out the next lot, a collection of references from the owner's library. The ancient, musty tomes drew little interest from the crowd, and bidding was hesitant at best. Twilight felt a certain sympathy for the books, unloved simply because they had fallen out of date, and after a moment called out a bid herself. She was caught off guard, however, when no further bids followed. And on the spot she found herself the owner of a large box of old, dusty, important books. Carrying them back to the palace had been a struggle, but, thankfully, her status there had led a guard to volunteer to return her books to her suite for her. His name was Shining Iron. Her friends had returned from their errands around the city by then, and she had to endure mocking over her acquisition. But it was good-natured for the most part, and at any brief rate, they soon had to depart for yet another session in the Congress Hall, waiting to see if they would be at last permitted to speak. Thankfully they were, and after voicing their opinions, largely they felt such a holiday would be ostentatious, and the spirit of harmony would be better served by ordering its elements in day-to-day life. Speak for yourself, Twilight! They were permitted to depart for Ponyville, souvenirs of the trip in tow. I wanted a freaking holiday. Twilight had lost little time bringing the books into their basement. Their condition required them to be properly cleaned and treated before introducing them into the library proper, assuming that there was merit in doing so. Their age was considerable, and she suspected their value as references was negligible. But, all the same, they might provide a window into the past that would give her some evening's worth of entertainment. As he removed the books from their container, however, she noticed one he had previously overlooked, pressed between the volume of appendices and the side of the box. It was smaller than the others, bound in a simple black cover, like the title or any other adornment. It's usually easy to book open. She discovered a flyleaf on which, in neat and steady strokes, the prior owner had written, "Property of Wild Clover, once warden in Celestia's service." She flipped carefully through the pages, realizing quickly it was a diary. And not just any diary. Partly through the book, she recognized the diagram, one commonly used by instructors at the School for Gifted Unicorns to aid in students the proper mindset to cast a spell. The particular markings on the diagram, however, were not ones she recognized. The general layout appeared to be a spell of knowledge, and perhaps of warding, but the actual function of the spell eluded her. The diary must have belonged to a unicorn, one who possessed knowledge beyond her own. Resisting the urge to salivate, she turned the pages more swiftly, seeing more illustrations scattered throughout the text, scraps of knowledge and theory being considered, fit together, and sometimes rejected. It reminded her of her own diary when she was doing research, her thoughts unwilling to be confined to her official research journal, and spelling out whenever she might write. There was something else, though, something that struck her as odd. As he drew closer and closer to the end of the book, the author's writing lost more and more of its neat, formal style, became ragged and unsteady. There were blotches here and there of spilled ink, words angrily scratched out, even a page that had been torn to powder altogether. Finally, no more than two-thirds of the way through the text, another magical diagram appeared, one so sloppily drawn that she could barely make it out. The rest of the tome was blank. Twilight closed the book slowly, considering what she had seen. What had happened to Wild Clover while he was writing his diary? Had something gone wrong in his life? Some building stress that had led to his degeneration bit by bit? What had driven him so intensely to the creation of the second spell? And what was it intended to do? And why had that been the final entry? Only one way to do, she ultimately decided. She had to read the diary and see. July 23rd, 982. Today marks my first day of civilian life since I entered Celestia's service. I admit to some trepidation about the project. I spent many years among the elite, studying ancient and mysterious texts, developing new methods of warding Equestria against the terrorists that lurk outside its borders, traveling to distant lands to renew boundary stones and recover forgotten lore. Yet, it seems my greatest challenge may be living as an ordinary unicorn within the safety and security of Canterlot's halls. My pension has secured me a modest mansion in the outskirts of the residential district. Minimally furnished, yet sufficient to house the numerous manuscripts I have collected over the years. I shall be moving my possessions into it over the course of the day. To commemorate the occasion, I have purchased a new journal. It is which this is the first entry. I am uncertain what I shall write in it, as I no longer have the minutiae of life as a royal warder to record, no ghosts to collect, no hypotheses to form. I shall record what events occur in daily life as I make the transition to civilian, hopefully successfully. Hopefully they will prove sufficient. The guards have arrived to assist me with my possessions. Until later, good journal. Twilight wondered what had happened to Wild Clover's other journals. Will she be able to track down their new owner as she acts around Canterlot? July 23rd, evening. A curious happening today. On arriving in the neighborhood of my new housing, I encountered a pony of cerulean fur and goldenrod mane. Her cutie mark resembled a cylindrical packet being snapped in half, with sparks of glitter shooting from the brake. Ordinarily, I would have taken a little note of her as I did any other pony on the street, but she happened to be standing in the most convenient avenue for me to approach my new dwelling, and I thought it impolite to brush past her without a word. I offered her greeting, but something in my manner or tone appeared to offend her, for she let out a great exhalation of fright, then ran into the crowd with startling alacrity. I was altogether uncertain what to make of the proceedings. As it turned out, there was some minor difficulty in securing the keys to my lodging, so I elected to wander into the marketplace and have a late lunch while the movers sorted out matters and put my belongings inside. Thus fortified, I elected to further delay my return to my new home by meandering about the shops, attempting to learn where best to purchase additional furnishings, as well as the sundries of daily life. Eventually, however, I tired of these pursuits and returned to my dwelling place, where I found the keys tucked under the mat. The security, or lack thereof, of such an arrangement was made immediately evident on my entrance into the building, for, with a great shout, a multitude of ponies waiting in the foyer of my house made themselves apparent. I admit, I was greatly taken aback, wondering for a moment if I had somehow inadvertently entered the wrong building. The true nature of their presence swiftly became clear, however. It seems the pony I had encountered earlier in the day lives in the neighborhood, and taken it upon herself to throw me a housewarming party, inviting all of my new neighbors to attend. I was wearier than I thought for the day's labors, and the fright I had received upon entering my house, a place I had thought would be of refuge and solitude, left me feeling most ill-tempered. But the pony seemed to immune to my choleric mood, pressing food and drink upon me, and introducing me to my neighbors at such a rapid pace I was unable to successfully retain a single name other than her own. Party Popper. Is she happen to be related to Party Favor? Faced with such a display of blithe ignorance, and unwilling to resort to the level of hostility necessary to clear the attendants out with their assistance, I chose the coward's path and retreated into my bedroom, which thankfully was not occupied. It was my hope that, in the absence of the guest of honor, the party would quickly dissipate, but it seemed to linger for an unconsiderable length of time before the house grew still. I now have completed a survey of the house, satisfying myself that no trace of the ringleader or cohort remained. I was pleasantly surprised to discover that my intruder is at least a curious host, as I found almost no evidence of the expected debris for such an entertainment, and my possessors are molested to the best of my knowledge. Still, it is an experience I hope not to repeat. Tomorrow will hopefully be less eventful, good Journal. Twilight smiled wryly, remembering an oddly familiar encounter in her own past. She wondered if Pinkie had any cousins in Canterlot. However, unlike her and Pinkie, it seemed while Clover and Party Popper didn't become friends. Indeed, they made no mention of her in the next several diary entries, was gathered the rather mundane details of settling into retirement, getting his house organized, and considering hobbies to occupy his now plentiful spare time. Another entry caught her eye. August 18th, 982. I saw Party Popper in the marketplace again today. I'm still uncertain what to make of our previous encounter. Those of my neighbors I have spoken to all know her, but none of them were able to supply any details one might expect a neighbor to know, such as a place of residence or a typical routine. Perhaps she is a vagabond. Yet, I would not expect someone in that state to have made such a persistent impression on my neighborhood. All those I had spoken to agree that, although the intensity of her personality can on occasion be uncomfortable, she is possessed of near exhaustible exuberance, enough to melt even the sternest of hearts. It makes me wonder why I had not seen her between my arrival in the neighborhood and today. But I digress. I first saw her at some distance, a flash of color that caught my attention. She was partially crouched behind some barrels, and though it was difficult to be certain at such a remove, she appeared to be observing another pony, green with a violet mane. I was unable to observe her cueing mark, as he was wearing saddlebags. Perhaps the other pony had reason to suspect he was being observed, for she turned almost immediately to look behind her. Party Popper ducked behind the barrels just in time, however, and eluded observation. I observed the barrels, curious if Party Popper was perhaps attempting to play some jest on the other pony. It would be difficult for her to move from her position without exposing herself at some point. I wondered if she would wait for her target to be obscured by the other ponies in the plaza, or perhaps the diversion or distraction to be taking the green pony's attention. Then I noticed the color out of the corner of my eye turned to look. Party Popper was looking up from behind a potted plant, at least 10 yards away from her former hiding spot. The method of her transit from one hiding place to another completely eluded me. The plaza, as I said, was occupied by other ponies, but for her to maneuver in such a way as to be constantly hidden from my sight by them would have taken both consummate skill and fair portion of luck. Furthermore, such a course would have provided her no protection from her target's gaze, which still seemed to be her primary concern. Not only that, but he had significantly closed the distance between her and the other pony, a feat which would have required speed and incredible strength. Her target had traveled no slower than a walk throughout the time it spent observing the barrels, and more or less in a straight line. The pursuit again looked behind her, again foiled by a swift retreat by Party Popper. Then, in my direction, causing me to hastily avert my gaze. Fortunately, she seemed to not have noticed my attention, for she then continued on her way, and I was able to observe her approaching a local fruit merchant stand. I was briefly distracted by the oranges on display, imported from southern lands, and considered making a purchase myself. Then Party Popper appeared again, from inside the fruit stand. I could not fathom how she was able to perform such a feat. The The construction of this cart itself should not have permitted her to persist in her body in such a fashion, unless it were equipped, for some reason, with not one, but two secret access panels. Furthermore, it would seem improbable for her to make her way to, then onto the cart, without having attracted my notice, and impossible to do so without being spied by either the green pony or the fruit vendor. Yet, they both seemed startled by the occurrence. The two exchanged some short conversation that I was not privy to. Then Party Popper withdrew into the fruit stand. I noted that the green pony reached briefly for the oranges, as if determined to meet in Party Popper's appearance. Then lowered her hoof again, shook her head, and walked away. I suspect she was uncertain she wanted the obvious question answered. Where her heart may have faltered, however, mine still pounds in my chest. Such feats should not be possible for an earth pony to perform. Indeed, I am uncertain that I would be able to perform them without the collaboration of the fruit vendor. I let it serve for some time after a case of Party Popper should return to congratulate him on the jest, but without yielding, fruit, I do apologize. Is it possible that she has an accomplice of some sort in her drapery? If so, why was I unable to observe the accomplice, or even the slightest hint of magic being invoked? I must define a course of action that will enable me to learn how this trick was performed. I shall keep on you to keep my thoughts ordered, dear journal. Twilight couldn't help but recall her own encounter with only one of Pinky's unknown quantities, her so-called Pinky sense. The experience had been traumatic, and not just in an emotional sense. It was that the universe had conspired to physically punish her for investigating that mystery too deeply. At the time, she believed she'd come to accept that there were some things science couldn't explain. But thinking back on it, she wondered she had given up under the strain, convinced on some level that the price of knowledge was too high. While Clover's words woke that thirst for knowledge in her mind again. She turned to the pages eagerly, wondering what, if anything, he had learned. September 7th, 982. Another day, another frustrating failure. Party Popper continues to profess no knowledge of any sort of unusual behavior or abilities on her part, despite continuing to exhibit these strange behaviors and abilities. While her cooperation with my studies seemed at first easy to achieve, it has become apparent to me that she is performing some sort of mockery at my expense, waiting until the very moment it is impossible for me to observe her translocation, then performing it in such a way as to maximize discomfort and shock, only to deny having done anything out of the ordinary. I do not care how guilelessly she acts. It is not possible for her to have simply walked from my study to the inside of my refrigerator without me having observed her passes in any way whatsoever. Her abilities are producing further difficulties in my study. She can seemingly appear at any time, any place, so long as no eyes are actively upon her hiding place. Twice now I have found her reading over my shoulder as I attempted to research possible methods of earth ponies commanding the flow of magic. My time writing here has divided most unpleasantly by the need to look repeatedly over my shoulders for such an intrusion. Even if I develop some counter to whatever technique she is using to confound my senses, it will be useless if she learns of it and deploys a counter of her own. Unless, theoretically, it should be possible to prepare a spell that has no countermeasure. If no spell to allow one pony to observe another's without flaw, that possesses the existence of a spell to deny observation without flaw. Either should serve my purposes. Either she would no longer be able to prevent me from observing her relocation, or she would be able to unprevent me from following her until such time as she relocated. My inability to perceive the relocation proof that it had nonetheless occurred. I shall begin the unnecessary research immediately. In this, dear journal, you will assist me. That was the first spell, Twilight realized. She skimmed through the following entries, feeling she was looking over Wild Clover's shoulders as he tested one school of magic against the other, divination against obfuscation, striving to see which would come out top. His intellect was obvious, his devotion to the task admirable. It wasn't the raw prodigy she was, but, she suspected in a contest of knowledge, she would have come out second best. At last, she reached the entry, whose facing page contained the diagram. November 19th, 982. It is completed. The spell I have constructed will make me aware without fail of the presence and location of any intelligence which is observing or attempting to observe me. It draws from both disciplines, acting as both unstoppable object and unmovable forces. It is the only counter that it uses the same spell. It will make both casters aware of each other's attention. I shall place Party Popper in a situation where she wishes to relocate without drawing my attention. Necessarily, So you must undermine my own persistence and focus in order to do so, at which point my spell will allow me to track her as she relocates. Even if she should have persisted in the spell and the ability to cast it, I will know the instant she does. Either way, I will have tangible proof that she is not merely performing some trick of misdirection to avert my intention. With that proof, I will confront her once and for all. I will learn her secret, dear journal. Twilight looked at the diagram for some time, considering casting the spell, but in the end decided against it. There was still the rest of the journal to read, after all, and the decline in his writing had her concerned. Had he somehow performed the spell incorrectly? November 20th, 982. I fear I've made a miscalculation. Last night, I performed the spell without mishap, satisfying myself that there was no attention being cast at that time on my person, electing to sustain the spell, for, by its measure, it must be active constantly for any use. I went to bed. My sleep, however, was uneasy. Just as I had begun to drift off, I was startled awake by an awareness that someone was observing me. The sensation most peculiar, however, for the component of the spell that should have informed me of the location of the attention was giving me impossible results. I am uncertain how to describe what I sensed, save that it came from quite near me, yet I could draw no closer to it, and no matter how hard I moved it about in the room. At last, I dismissed the spell. I might rest, yet a lingering sensation remained. My imagination, perhaps. I suspected the spell was flawed, yet some primitive portion of my mind refused to accept the verdict so easily. The night passed slowly. I spent the morning attempting to determine where I might have gone wrong, without success. Eventually, I decided I would need more data to determine the location of the flaw, so recast the spell. Thankfully, without the sensation of observation immediately returning, I set about to walk among the shouts of Canterlot to see if the spell had improved its intended function. In that regard, it was a success. I was immediately able to discern the eyes of fellow citizens around me, as if a glow were hanging in my thoughts, filled with sense perception. Cones of sight and blobs of sound. I was even able to distinguish between those who were merely perceiving me and those who had taken some active interest in me, perhaps to avoid walking into me. It was a curious perception, like suddenly being able to perceive the flow of blood in your body. Yet the spell granted me only the perception, but mastery thereof. Unfortunately, when I reached the marketplace, the phantom perception returned. I was no more able to track it than I had the night before, and I began to wonder if the spell had the unfortunate side effect of generating paranoia in the subject. Unfortunate, indeed, given the spell's intended function of removing the reason for such an affliction. An alternative theory presented itself as well. The party popper might have indeed learned of my spell, or independently derived it, and found some way to mitigate its effects that I had overlooked. So I would be able to tell she was watching me, but unable to say for certain from where. Such a precaution would render it useless for my purposes. I saw her then, standing next to a vendor of mescaline of the sort used for the evening's entertainment. I had previously seen her making purchases there, and if not for the sensations I was experiencing, would have thought little of it. Nonetheless, I determined to make some test of my hypotheses, so I called out to her to draw her attention. Immediately, the spell notified me of that attention. First by sound, then by sight she turned to look at me. Something in my demeanor must have alarmed her, for she left behind a scent, blocking my vision, but not my perception of her. Then a most astonishing thing happened. She moved in a way I do not have words to describe here. Though my senses insisted she was still there, she was also elsewhere. No more than a few feet away from where she started in a direction I have no name for. She moved swiftly out from behind the cover and down an alley, and I thought, as I was all the while, I could see no trace of her passage. She only moved in a direction opposite to her first motion, placing her back in the now, here, in a location I could not see. Shortly thereafter, my perception of her faded as she ceased looking for me. Even as I recorded these events, I could scarcely credit their reality. The smaller mystery of Party Popper's abilities, even now unsolved, although tantalizing clarified, pales in comparison to the thought I am being, even as I write this, observed by unknown intelligences. I speak of the plural because, even in that brief glimpse of our locomotion, I learned much. The attention I sensed is diffused, that of multiple entities. Indeed, they seem to be separated by great distances, their perceived closeness appearing only in aggregate. At The former percepted something like sight, something like sound, but not entirely like either. Furthermore, they appeared to be observing me from the opposite direction as taken by Party Popper during her escape. I am uncertain of the significance of this, but I have decided no observation for that direction. Their attention, thankfully, is not constant. Waxes and wanes in a rhythm I have not identified. I shall notify you as I learn more, dear journal. Twilight bit her lip, looking around her basement. Visible beings, watching her every move? Was it a fancy Clover invented under the influence of unstable mind magic? Or had she found something all too real? She hoped reading the rest of the journal would tell her more. December 17th, 982. I believe that I have at last determined what draws the attention of the beings in outer space. I have been maintaining a graph of the apparent intensity of our observation over the last month, and after comparing it with the entries I have made during the time in you, O faithful journal, I determined that it was varied in direct proportion to the level of, or like for a better word, excitement of my life. Even now, it rises to a new peak as to confirm my hypothesis. Yet, it cannot simply be related to my own levels of arousal or anticipation, for, on several occasions, a heightening of attention served as a prelude to something dramatic happening in my vicinity, as if the out-of-space beings were able to predict the current event occurring, or perhaps could see the chain of events being set in motion from their unique perspectives. Party Popper has become elusive for the last few weeks. Perhaps she has become aware of the breakthrough in my observational method. I have been able to detect her watching for me, even when I have been nowhere near her. Several times I have detected her entering kata space, perhaps in an attempt to elude me, perhaps for unrelated reasons. She doesn't seem to spend more than a short amount of time in space. I am uncertain if this means that there is some inherent risk in that space, something that might explain the lack of observers in that direction, or if it is a simple reflection of her ability to travel at great speed while looking in that space. Her time spent in kata space is not constant, but the natural log of my measurements has no more than a plus negative +0.5 deviation from the mean. If I can locate her, I will press her for more information. Does she know about the anaspace beings? Is that why she likes to travel only in kata space? Are they capable of entering our space? Do they mean us harm, or by the observers? Unfortunately, I must strive to answer these questions on my own. I have been having increasing difficulty coping with this attention. I will disable the spell tonight. I pray to Celestia that you will not choose that moment I take my eye to strike. Sleep well, dear journal. The sun had set. Twilight was unaware of this. December 18th, 982. I am unable to end that spell. Have I sustained it too long without rest, or does some other force now empower it? In either event, it no longer reacts to my commands. It feels almost as if the spell itself had begun to spread outward, into anaspace and kata space, outside the grip of my will. If anything, it's stronger now, clearer. I can sense the very moment of being looks away from me, when another focuses their gaze. There are more of them now, I'm sure of it. First, they are merely curious, or happen to be observing me as I observed any number of things and people in the passing of the day. Their attention has increased, however. Whether this means they become aware of my observation, or is important of some event of great significance in my life, I am uncertain. I must have answers. The pursuit of knowledge has brought me into this vale, and knowledge will lead me out. Long-distance communication is not my forte, but it is not an unrelated discipline to my studies, and at any rate, I have more experience, I dare hope, in the field of study than any other. I must construct a new spell that will allow me to determine why they focus their eyes on me, but somehow plead my case to them. I cannot go on this state, not indefinitely. Every pony needs a sanctuary, a place solely his own. Whether their intent is good or for ill, it is destroying me, as surely as darkness is destroyed by the light. Wish me well, dear journal. Twilight read the journal, page by page, as Wild Clover detailed his attempts to construct a spell that would let him see or hear or speak in direction as opposed to every direction, his voice growing more frantic with each failure. Party Popper decided entirely for the narrative at this point. Did that mean she left Canterlot, or was he simply no longer concerned for her? He seldom left his house, at any rate, only to test a spell or collect the bare necessities of survival. He seldom slept, seldom bathed. His entries became rapid and disjointed. 2 pages were devoted entirely to a letter to Anaspace, pleading with the entities that dwelled there to let him live in peace. Another entity accused them of trying to drive him mad, knowing him to be the only pony aware of their growing power and threat to Equestria. One even lambasted the journal itself for being in league with them, as if he somehow wouldn't notice their attention increased each time he wrote in it. Yet, he never stopped searching for an answer. At last, he found it. March 15th, 983. It is finished. Twilight studied the diagram intently, tore the blank page at the Cyril out, and began to make marks of her own. It was secretly drawn, yes, but not as incoherent as he thought, not with the bulk of the journal to answer her questions about whether this mark was supposed to be to the left or right of that, whether this blob was to be circular or elliptical. It only took her 5 minutes to reconstruct the diagram in her own precise writing. It didn't look like anything would happen at all. She understood the basic principles, at least. It was a long-distance communication spell, one that would, in theory, allow her to contact another pony hundreds, if not thousands of miles away, requiring only a painstakingly precise description of the target pony. Most of the spell was devoted to such a description, meaning that, in theory, all Twilight would have to do is cast a spell and be put in touch with whoever, Clover had contacted. But the symbols were all wrong. The way they were organized, shape, and placement, none of it made sense. She had to study the spell to figure out how to make it work for someone else. But she understood enough of it to make a beginning and an arrangement for any of her friends. For Celestia, she could make an educated guess of how any pony's goods would look. Indeed, any equestrian's. The goods looked nothing like one of those. It shouldn't do anything. And yet, that was the end of the journal. Nearly 20 years ago. What had happened to him? It didn't kill him, obviously, but the condition of his house was consistent with having been neglected for that long. What had caused the once successful royal warder to sink into obscurity for 20 years without even the slightest comment? For she felt certain she would have heard something about him in her childhood if he served some sort of cautionary tale. She looked at her diagram, at the journal, her diagram. She had to know. Just like him. She focused her eyes on the diagram, placed its encyclical states in her mind, pushed power through them, into a horn. It took a lot. She was beginning to sweat when, at last, she felt something shift. Something happened. Whatever she'd done, she had done something. She opened her eyes and screamed. Ah! She didn't stop screaming when Spike ran in. She didn't stop screaming when other ponies came in. Summoned by a panicked Spike, she didn't stop screaming until they had hauled her body to the Ponyville clinic. The screaming stopped again the moment they left her room. They're back! Oh, Celestia, they're back! Make them go away! Albusek looked uneasily at Rainbow Dash, who winced at the sound. Fluttershy, attempting to try to will herself invisible, despite Rarity's best efforts to comfort her. Twilight had been sleeping, if uneasily, and he'd begun to hope whatever madly struck her down, as if it wasn't serious as it seemed when Spike found her. Nurse Tenderheart sighed. And she was doing so well, she said, echoing their sentiment. I'm afraid I'm going to have to sedate her. She walked off to get the sedative. I wish I knew what happened to her, Applejack said. It just don't seem natural. I'm afraid I haven't a clue, Rarity replied. It looks like she was studying some sort of spell, but, well, the details were frankly beyond me. She's going to get better, though, right? Rainbow Dash looked from one face to another, seeking reassurance. Right? None of them had any to give. Fluttershy had something to say, though. Pinkie Pie? The other three ponies blinked, looked at her, then looked where she was looking. Pinkie Pie had just appeared, looking neither her usual bubble self or the desponding feeling they all felt. Instead, she looked determined. Not like her expression when she single-handedly dealt with that parasite infection, like she was annoyed with having to deal with everything herself. What's he been yelling about? She demanded of Rarity, who shied back at the tone of her voice. She's been talking about ponies watching her, saying it hurts. Ponies are people, Rarity blinked. People, I suppose. What difference does that? Are they watching her all the time? No. She said they went away a bit after we got her here. Pinkie Pie, has he been talking in tongues? This would be the most important question of all. Pinkie gets her face right up to Rarity's, eyes bugging out. No. Rarity answered, unable to muster further response. Pinkie immediately sagged back down, expressive relief flowing over her face. Phew! That was a close one.
That'd be a real doozy to clean up. Okay, everybody wait right here, and I'll be right back.
She walked into Twilight's room, not caring that all of her friends were staring at her now. Twilight turned to look at her, pleading expressing on her face.
Pinky, you gotta make them stop looking at me. It hurts.
Pinkie Pie nodded.
You get like that sometimes. It's okay.
Twilight's eyes widened.
You believe me?
She gasped, sounding hopeful, seeing something she hadn't expected to see in Pinkie's eyes.
Of course I do,
Pinkie tearily replied.
You watch me all the time.
Can you do something? Make them go away or make me forget about them or... Pinkie considered the attitude with all due gravity.
Well, I can't make them go away, but I can make it so it doesn't hurt anymore. That's it.
Ray and the others exchanged puzzled looks.
Anything,
Twilight said, looking like a drowning merle grabbing a lifeline. I'll do anything. Pinkie then giggled, walked over to the door of the room, looking at friends.
This is a little private, so you just wait there, okay? Thanks.
Dizzy closed the door in their faces. Rarity and the others exchanged puzzled looks. Nurse Tenderheart returned, placing a wheeled tray with a bottle of medicine on it. Then paused as he noticed the door was closed.
Pinky went in to talk to Twilight or something, Rainbow Dash said. Maybe you could give her a minute?
There was a horrible, blood-curdling scream.
Eek!
Applejack spun and pushed on the door, back-mouthed sourly. It's locked! Nurse Tenderheart grew confused.
All these doors locked from the inside,
she protested. Applejack tried to unlock without effect, but noticed a reddish glow.
Twilight locked it with music,
she said, flabbergasted. Randy began to step forward, horn glowing.
I'll see if I can unlock it,
she said, but Applejack was already swinging into position, blocking her path.
My way's faster, Applejack said. Yeah!
She bumped at the door, breaking the lock and causing the door to fly open. A yard starts past her, discovering, in awake, alert, and seemingly normal Twilight, smiling at them from the hospital bed. Pinkie Pie looked surprised they busted in, but otherwise, she looked her normal teary self as well. Rainbow Dash spoke first.
Twilight, are you okay?
Twilight nodded.
I'm sorry to worry all of you, she said. I had a little trouble with a spell, but
Pinkie sorted it all out.
Pinkie helped you with a spell,
Rainbow Dash replied, her expression deadpan.
Well, no, not the spell itself, Twilight admitted. More the effects of it. I found out the hard way that there are the things that Polly was not meant to know.
The others, save Pinkie, blinked at being able to hear the capital letters.
Mac looked. Oh, you weren't meant to know them, Twilight answered cheerily. That's okay, though. Pinkie helped me come to terms with it all, so I'm all right now.
She got an odd giggle.
Mostly. On the people who lost you gone away,
Rarity wondered.
Twilight shook her head. Oh, no, they're still here, she said with more certainty. But that's all right. They won't hurt me anymore. They didn't mean to anyway.
The other ponies are staring at an uneasy look. Nurse Tenderheart spoke.
I think you should spend at least another day here for observation. You don't believe me.
Twilight protested, then shrugged.
That's okay. It's better if you don't. I promise not to bring them up again.
She paused in wonder.
Would you mind bringing me something to read while I'm here? Maybe,
Pinkie Pie piped up.
Applied Quantum Rainbow Dynamics? Did you audition? Oh, is that okay?
Twilight said, parking up.
Yes, I put an R in, if you wouldn't mind picking it up. Okie dokie dokie!
Pinkie replied, echoed by Twilight. The two looked at each other, then broke into identical giggles. The ponies exchanged another easy look.
Well, we're gonna let you guess rest, okay, Twilight? No problem, Twilight said. Thanks for stopping by. Hopefully I can convince them to let me out tomorrow. I really need to clean up the basement. I may have missed of having you drag me out and everything.
Slowly, the assembled ponies filled out one by one. Nurse Tenderheart making Twilight promise to call her as he started feeling a little unwell. The rest of them offered some well wishes, and Pinkie was the last one out. The others waited to ambush her with questions about exactly what she'd done, and why Twilight was still acting a bit, well, like Pinkie. But they were destined to be disappointed. It was for the best, after all. Twilight, for her part, took a deep, cleansing breath, slumped back into her pillow, wriggled about a bit, getting comfortable. She was feeling a bit tired, after all. Going crazy took it out of you, and the cure had been concentrated for a dose of the more of the same. So she decided to take a nap, while she waited for Pinkie to return with her book. There was just one more thing to do.
I guess I'll see you later then. Uh, um. Well, wasn't that an interesting tale? All these tales were quite unusual, weren't they? And, shh, Una, she's still asleep. Oh, sorry. Anyway, Scooter dear, would you care to announce the next story? Monday. We all know of what happened that nightmare night for Luna. But what happened to our dear friend Verity? Monday, let us check out the night after nightmare night. Ha 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 ha!